Hello, thank you for joining us. I want to just allow a few minutes for attendees that are joining us via Zoom to connect to the meeting. We will get started in just a few moments here. Thank you very much. Once again, thank you if you're just joining us. We are just allowing a few minutes for those that wish to join us via Zoom to log on to the meeting, and we will begin momentarily. Okay, I don't see too many people continuing to join us via Zoom, so let's go ahead and get started. Today, I just want to first say thank you for joining us. Good afternoon. Welcome to our Testing Accommodation Stakeholder Input Forum. The purpose of the forum are to discuss some ways to make a remote testing accommodation secure. This would be for the upcoming July 2024 exam or possibly a future exam after that. My name is Christina Dole. I'm a manager within the Office of Admissions, and I'm here today also with Elizabeth Holm, who is the Director of Access and Inclusion here at the State Bar. Elizabeth will be assisting and facilitating the meeting today. I also wanted to acknowledge other staff members that are here. Donna Hershkowitz, the Chief of Programs and the Legislative Director. Both Audrey Ching and Tara Clark, Program Managers within the Office of Admissions. You will also see our ASL interpreters on camera as well. For those of you that have joined the forum today and wish to make comments and suggestions, we may ask you follow-up questions to determine the viability and accessibility of your suggestions on ways to ensure that the testing accommodations offered during a remote or hybrid exam are viable. Attendees today are welcome to stay as long as they wish. You may stay the entire forum or just long enough to have a dialogue of your ideas and suggestions. We have attendees participating via Zoom, but we also may have people joining us in the State Bar offices, both in the LA and the San Francisco office. Speakers today will have 5 minutes to make comments. We ask that you please focus your comments on how to deliver the exam securely in a remote or a hybrid setting, bar exam setting, for applicants granted testing accommodations. For those participating via Zoom and you wish to make a comment, please use your raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen. And for those that are participating by phone, please dial *9 to raise your hand. At this point, I am going to turn it over to Elizabeth Holm. Thank you very much, Elizabeth.
Thanks, Christina. I'm very pleased to be able to join you all today to help facilitate this forum. As you know, the State Bar of California has been exploring changes to how it administers the bar exam. Beginning with the July 2024 exam, the bar is looking at how feasible it would be to administer day one of the exam, the essays and performance test, primarily remotely. State Bar staff have researched and studied various options to make a remote exam equally available to those with or without testing accommodations. But I anticipate that many of you here today will have other suggestions or solutions that the State Bar may not have considered, and what your input is welcomed so that the State Bar may learn from them. During the pandemic, certain accommodations that required test takers to be out of view of the camera could not be accommodated remotely. These included needing to handwrite the exam, needing to have the opportunity to take bathroom breaks while a test session was in progress, needing physical scratch paper, needing physical copies of the exam questions, having a typist reader, or using screen reader or speech recognition software such as JAWS or Dragon Speech. The goal for future administrations of the bar exam is to improve on the past remote administrations by finding solutions to provide all test takers with accommodations the option to test remotely while preserving the exam's validity and integrity. Your input is valuable and your participation is encouraged today. I hope that this forum will generate ideas and potential solutions. Your thoughts and input will be noted, and staff will explore these ideas as they continue to plan for the July 2024 exam. My role today will be to listen to your suggestions, encourage a dialogue by asking follow-up questions, and to ensure that everyone who wishes to make a comment has the opportunity to do so. A reminder that the State Bar is still in the fact gathering stage and exploring options for the remote exam. Any discussions, including my comments today, should not be interpreted as committing to or rejecting any particular course of action. Rather, the State Bar hopes to encourage an open dialogue, spurring new avenues for exploration and analysis following the forum. As Christina mentioned, the process for today's forum will, if you wish to make a comment, please raise your hand. If you are in the San Francisco or Los Angeles offices, staff will help facilitate that. If you are participating by Zoom, you may raise your hand, again, using the raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen. And if you're participating by phone, by dialing *9. At this time, we want to begin with the comments. And again, if you could please focus comments on the topic immediately at hand today, that is suggestions for how to address in a remote setting those testing accommodations that were not able to be accommodated remotely in the past.
Okay, I want to go to first the in-person San Francisco or LA office. I do not visually see anyone in the offices, and I do not see either of our facilitators raising their hands that they have anyone in the office. So I'm going to move first to the people that had requested to make a public comment by emailing staff. The first person on my list, if the person is in attendance, is Sana. Is Sana in attendance? If so, can we promote Sana? For those of you that are joining us via Zoom, again, you can raise your hand to make a public comment via your raise hand function at the bottom of your screen. For those joining via phone, it is *9 to raise your hand. I don't see Sana on our panel at this point. So Sana, I can come back to you if I see that you join later. The next person that signed up to make public comment is Benjamin. Benjamin, I do see you on the panel. If you would like to make a public comment, if we can promote Benjamin. and you will be able to unmute yourself if you are ready to make a public comment.
I am, thank you. The first method of addressing people, which I know you have been looking into, and I think is the most my preferred one, is the body cam method. I appreciate your mention of the dialogue format so that I can address maybe concerns that you may or roadblocks you may have encountered as to getting that particular one integrated. I anticipate that probably your largest concern is delivery of the recording video to the state bar in a secure method, since ExamSoft did not in the past have that functionality. And I want to suggest offering other software either for the whole exam or in addition to ExamSoft running in order to extract video and submit that either in real time or without an internet connection, which may be part of the issue. I think it's very important to have the recording method, whether it's a body cam or otherwise, not dependent on a live internet connection, because that tended to spawn discussion of rules that if the internet connection drops for a short period of time during the test, it invalidates the whole thing. Sometimes that could lead to a high amount of risk for an applicant to assume, if the applicant's assuming all risk of technical difficulties. So I want to also give some alternatives, such as having proctors view the video without an internet connection, but without requiring applicants to have the unequal thing for a situation of going to a test center. And one way to do that would be something like a CCTV, where there are cameras in the test room in the applicant's home. Those cameras are connected without the internet to a viewing station where the state bar staff or proctors can view it on site at the applicant's home, but not in the room with the applicant, particularly since COVID concerns are still a big issue for some applicants with certain disabilities and some applicants who maybe don't have elevated disability risks, but who still recognize the fact that COVID is very dangerous. It's very contagious. There are a lot of reasons to not have a person's sole pathway into a profession be constrained to their willingness to subject themselves to a lot of in-person exposure while taking a test to COVID. And I think, at least for the applicants whose disabilities make them at higher risk, such as immunocompromised applicants, there also needs to be some recognition, whether in person or remote, that certain technologies like Optiv ViraWarn, HEPA filtration, Lucira testing of the proctors, mask mandates of the people involved, all of that needs to be included. I'll probably have more once everyone else has commented, or after I get more feedback from you or other applicants as to how other things can be integrated. But I want to end by saying that I think when this started in June, there was a lot of the language from 2020, and I do where applicants whose accommodations don't lend themselves to remote testing, and I do appreciate that at one of the meetings, and I think in August, Amy Nunes did say all applicants are testing accommodations, and I do appreciate that recognition that the goal here is to make it a bright line, that this is a standard test condition. This is not a modification. Things like fundamental alteration and undue burden really shouldn't apply to that. It really needs to be a bright line that the standard test condition is made available, even if that takes individualized customized exam security measures. I think Assemblyman Berman put that on his list of reforms, that customized exam security measures are is a step that the state bar needs to agree to. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Cohn, for your comments. You covered a lot of different topics there. So I'm going to try to go in order and as I heard them, but if I've missed anything, we can definitely circle back. So you did mention that there might be exam software that is not dependent on a live internet connection. Can you give us more information about that?
Right. So I wanted to differentiate, I guess, maybe between exam software as an exam soft and software to receive the video feed. There are programs that can receive the video feed from a camera in a secure way where the person doesn't have the ability to alter or edit the video. And that's something that you might use in addition to something like ExamSoft, even if it doesn't have it built in, where you would have that running to receive the video and then transmit it to the state bar at a later time if the internet's not available.
Okay, thank you. And you also mentioned closed CCTV in an applicant's home. Can you expand on that a little bit? And is that something that applicants would need to have installed in their home prior to the exam? How would the state bar ensure that those who had needed these cameras would have the ability to do that?
Well, I think the applicant might specify when they're signing up for the exam or requesting the accommodations that they would like to choose that from maybe among the options, and they would have to supply an address and a testing site that had certain conditions for what views were available to install the cameras at, and those views would need to cover more than a webcam would cover, because you need to be able to see things from their vantage point, what they're looking at, what they have around them, that kind of thing. So there would be some, I think, process for submitting pictures of the space, making sure it was compliant, making sure it had room for a camera that would have the right angle. And then there would be maybe a mutually acceptable appointment time for installation to set up, kind of like disabled applicants have an appointment to meet their proctor at a check-in time separate from the exam days to make sure that the equipment is in place and running smoothly. I think that could be as far as which equipment you would set up, I think the state bar would need to select the equipment in order to make sure that it's uniform and meets all security requirements.
Thank you. And then you also talked about mask mandates and HEPA filters and other products that could be used with to combat COVID and other illnesses. Are you talking about in person or for an in-person examination, or is that something you were suggesting for a remote option? That wasn't clear to me.
For an exam that required in-person exposure, if it was all able to be done in such a way where, like the body cam, that you maybe don't need to have any interaction with a proctor even at your home, then that doesn't implicate the COVID risks in the same way. But if you needed to have, in order to avoid an internet connection, someone sent over to your home to watch the video or to proctor the exam there, in the worst case, I think that's where you would use some of those technologies, because I think there's the worst thing to do would be to have it be a mega event, like the standard condition of in person, where you have to travel, you have to get food from restaurants, you have to stay in a hotel, and you have to expose yourselves to large groups. But for some disabilities, it's too much exposure to even have a private room with a proctor, and proctor's covering for them during the test, and that level of exposure still requires travel. And then for some applicants, still even having someone come to their home needs certain precautions taken, even if they don't have to travel. And that's where all of those things have different levels of COVID mitigations needed. But if you're going to have any in-person interaction at any place, I think masks are necessary, and testing is necessary. And for purposes of testing, I mentioned Lucira as something to use because the current variants only show up as a positive if there is a positive on rapid antigen about 30 to 50% of the time. So you would want to have the accuracy of a PCR, but the convenience of a rapid test. Lucira is the vendor that I know of that makes such products. There's also the ViraWarn, which scans, instead of the person, it scans the room to determine if there's any residuals in the air. COVID is something like measles, where you can get it from someone who breathed in the room without them being in the room still. So the ViraWarn scans the room for COVID, flu, and RSV, and alerts if there is unsafe levels detected. And that's more of a passive scan. You don't have to get people to swab, and it covers everyone who's present within a certain distance.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen. And you did mention body cams. Are you aware of other examinations that utilize those for security purposes?
I am not, which is part of the disappointment. Part of what's disappointing me is that I really am not seeing these things adopted at the moment on what I'm seeing most commonly adopted for other exams are like the Prometric sites, where you have an on-demand private room, but not the body cams or remote testing. And I think part of that may be the NCBE's influence for the legal profession exams, all the other jurisdictions, is that they're just trying to deter remote exams as much as they can.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Cohen. I think we went through kind of the various topics that you raised. Is there anything that you think I missed?
Not yet, but I do want to
Okay.
be able to, if everyone else has made a comment, expand on some of things that other people may mention or that may come to mind.
Sure, of course.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Benjamin. If you do decide that you wish to make a further comments, depending on the feedback we get from the rest of the attendees, just feel free to go ahead and raise that hand. That, again, on the phone is a #9, or via the Zoom function is the raise your hand feature at the bottom of the screen. We have had a few people register to make public comments ahead of today. I do not see any of those people in the attendees list, but I do want to give them a chance to raise their hand. If you signed up ahead of time to make comments, that would be Sana, Daria, Priyanka, Peter, and Apshika. If any of you are in the attendance, you are welcome to raise your hand feature so that I am aware that you are here and that you want to make public comments. Until I see any of their hands raised, I am going to move to the next person that does have their hand raised, and that is going to be Ray. If we can unmute Ray. Ray, you should have the ability to unmute yourself.
Testing. You hear me
Yep,
all right?
we can hear you. Thank you, Ray.
Wait for Devin to hit that counter. Anyway, so let's get into it. Benjamin Cohen, I'm familiar with his information. He's wicked smart. I appreciate much of the things that he's been doing for folks who need testing accommodations. I'm one of those folks who does not need testing accommodations, and I've become very familiar with it because other people contact me because of some of the public comments I've made on previous California bar meetings. And let me see. First thing is something he brought up was I just caught it out of the side of my ear. There was the RSV virus. And I've been sick for 2 months now, and I pretty much believe that it is the RSV, which is a highly contagious virus. And I believe I've identified who patient 0 was on that. So I try to avoid them until they're a school teacher, so they get whacked with illnesses all the time. Anyways, and in our home, in our actual home, our internet service is horrible. In fact, when I got into this meeting, the screen froze, and then the Zoom shut off and reconnected itself, which was pretty cool. But I did have to manually reconnect my internet for Zoom to finish that connection. So that's part of the problem. Is I'm in a good environment in Central Florida, and 100 yards up or down the road, people have just insanely fast internet, which is unbelievable. As a matter of fact, if I have to upload a video somewhere, I usually put it on my cell phone, drive a couple 100 yards away, and then upload it in seconds. Now, let me see here. The best exam is one which, I sent written comments in, Devin, right? Okay, oh, good, okay. So I'm gonna have to, defer to the people who are experts with the education training experience on these sort of things. And I greatly appreciate the issues with that. This is a hot mess. It's very difficult to do, specifically with the NCBE's MBE, which was my pretty much my preaching for a while now, is at CalBar, because you do have multiple choice questions for the first year exam. I took that puppy 6 times, so I'm very familiar with that. So I know that CalBar has the capacity and the capability to create their own multiple choice questions. One of the things I didn't get to a chance to discuss was the fact that the United States Air Force invited me to attend what they have called the Course for Authors. Every job in the Air Force, everything has a series of booklets and multiple choice questions exams. They're in the book, in the program, they have fill in the blanks and multiple choice. But the final exams that actually qualify a person for their job or whatever is multiple choice. So I'm a big fan of the multiple choice questions. I have decades of experience with the military and the federal government using them, and they work very well. But in the Course for Authors, I couldn't actually attend I had a conflict thing. So they sent me all the materials for my self-study to do it. So open education, open and distance learning was what I used on that. But the thing was, I didn't need to know anything about my course that I did, but I didn't need to know anything about my course. All I needed to know was how to create the course, find the subject matter experts, find the materials that needed to be tested, and work with the subject matter experts in any field in the Air Force. And we scale with those experts, we pre-scale the multiple choice questions. The passing scores were required were 70%, but individual units, I was security police, and we had a much higher requirement. And also, even though we had 18 months to complete our courses, our unit gave us 12 months to get it done. So, they put a higher educational standard on us at the base level than what the Air University required. And then see here, particular bar prep. Oh yeah, so the best exam is one which 2 things are assured. It is not possible to cheat at all, and it would be impractical to cheat, as prep for taking and passing the exam is far more beneficial to the examinee, and because penalties can be held very severe. For a bar exam kind of situation, I suggested an onboarding program, and I keep suggesting that. But the process there is, it's the stuff that the professional law has been begging for years. Give them everything they need to know to hit the ground running when they come out, so that we don't have to teach them and they don't have to take extra courses, get the job done. The other thing is the FAA recurrent written for my commercial drone pilot license. I have to take it every 2 years, can be taken more often than that. The FAA provides the materials, the videos and stuff like that, gives us a test, but they require a 100% pass. You have to get 100% to pass. So those are the kind of things on that. Lastly, owning and controlling the multiple choice questions is my #1 recommendation, and I've spoken to CalBAR about that before. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'm available.
Thank you, Ray. Yeah, we appreciate your suggestions. As you know, we're focusing today on sharing and discussing options for primarily remote exam administration. So changes to the exam itself and pathways to licensure are being considered through other processes at the State Bar. And it sounds like you've already shared these thoughts with those bodies already. But I did want to, you did mention internet connectivity.
Yes.
With administering a remote exam, do you have any suggestions on how the State Bar could manage, internet connectivity for those who, or submitting exam materials or exam answers for those who have poor internet connectivity?
I wish I had better answers, but the answer would be like the first time I did my commercial drone license, because my private pilot's license wasn't current at the time. I did have to go to a testing center in Orlando, which is an hour away from me, but also relatively close. That was one of, I believe it was Pearson VUE. Y'all should be, do you have those in California, Pearson VUE? Okay, so Pearson VUE, and there's the Prometric. I found a Wikipedia article on that, and it was very sad. But the Pearson VUE, I've never had any problems with it. All my licensures that I've done where I've had to take the test at Pearson VUE, they got cameras everywhere. They have Bruno with the baseball bat out in front watching you through big glass windows. So I think that it would be sad, a very sad mistake for anybody to cheat. Now, the other thing is that so these professionally qualified in-house testing things, for me, I would prefer to have to go do that, because I normally go into my laundry room, clean everything out, and I'm in my laundry room. And that has worked for the pandemic exams, but 2 times my answer files got chewed up by ExamSoft. It could have been, I don't know, and nobody's come up with any answers. Could have been an internet connection problem on my end, and I wouldn't doubt that. But it's like, we're the house, and maybe one other house over here, and nobody else has any problems, but we have really horrible internet, and even we've had people come out. But a professional remote testing facility like a Pearson VUE would probably be the best along those lines. And that's there's 2 problems. There's the multiple choice question part, assuming MBE, and the current written thing. Donna discussed this before, by the way, is in order in which to do that. Just there was nothing being locked down at the time based on what I recall, but she had mentioned that the MBE day is kind of locked in. That's true. So that's got to be locked in on a Wednesday, and everybody kind of freaked out. And the reports that I was hearing from everybody else about when to do the written, how does that happen? What happens? CalBAR staff pointed out the fact that everybody needs an opportunity to get back to where they are. And for the people who need testing accommodations, remember that, where the test accommodations have to be held over for like several days so that everybody else has a chance to get back home wherever it is, because the MBE is done. And that the written can be done remotely, and that could pretty much be done most anywhere. But then Donna also mentioned in a more current meeting, hopefully she remembers this, is about, because she mentioned like around the world, because there are people from all over the world, and a lot of people I talk to are from different countries in Europe, and they say, hey, what are we going to do? How are we going to do it? And it's like, I have no authority on it, but it looks like they're going to try to go with the half and half exam, as I call it. And then, and I heard Donna, I heard you say it, I heard you say maybe complete remote. You didn't lock into a time on that, but I would really love to see that ability for California Bar to have that completely remote. So then you have more control over where, when, and how you can offer that exam. But for now, the short answer is like Pearson VUE and other professional centers. I did look them up online, a couple of different ones, and they all do seem to have a series of testing accommodations for people who need those. So, that's my best one on that. And I am going to have to defer to people like Benjamin Cohn and other folks that have contacted me that have the education training experience plus the actual requirements, because they know what they need. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
If you have anything else, I'm here.
Thank you, Ray, for your comments. I see the next person with their hand raised at this time is Crystal. If we can go ahead and promote Crystal. Crystal, you should have the rights to unmute yourself,
Yes.
and we can hear you. Thank you, Crystal.
Yeah. So I'll just jump in as a comment to what the prior speaker was saying. Pearson VUE Testing Center, I have taken several tests there, including my ethics test. And they have good accommodations. They're smaller facilities for people that are worried about COVID exposures. I think you could even do the MBE on the day that the MBE requires it and do the essays on a different testing day if there's a concern about having it done separately. And then as far as administering it at home remotely, I did the baby bar remotely in 2020, I think it was, or 2021. And I used ExamSoft. I don't know if the concern with the internet connectivity is like the webcam, but ExamSoft takes over your whole screen on your computer. So you can't really tell if you lose internet. So if there's a concern that the webcam isn't recording and somebody might be doing something untrustworthy, I don't know that we could even do anything untrustworthy. I mean, we have to pass a moral character application. So there's a little bit of like, you got to know that we're honest people taking this bar. You're not going to license us if we're the type of people that are going to cheat on the bar because our internet went down. But I didn't have any problems with ExamSoft. As far as scratch paper went, we just had a notepad on the actual laptop. And that worked out okay. I think physical paper is better, especially with something as big as the bar exam. But I feel like, you know, we could still have like a blank sheet of computer copy paper and show it to the webcam that it's blank and then make our notes and then show it after the test. And I don't see why that wouldn't be just as sufficient as having to hand it off to a proctor. I already submitted a public comment beforehand, but in writing. I live in a rural area, so having the testing centers cut is kind of a big deal for me. Pearson VUE, the closest one to me, is about 3.5 hours away, which is still better than driving to Daly City, which is, 6 hours and some crazy traffic. So yeah, that's basically my thoughts on it. I think it would be great if we could remotely administer this test. We've already done it before. Obviously, there must have been problems. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been this meeting. And I don't know specifically what those problems were, but I didn't have any issues with it. So, and I live in rural California where my internet goes out all the time. So I get that that's a concern, but I also think that the bar can make accommodations for that issue when it comes up.
Great. Thank you, Crystal. And thank you for submitting your written comments in advance. Really appreciate your feedback, in your comments and just now related to Pearson VUE and your experience with ExamSoft. And I did just also want to note that my understanding is that remote test takers were able to have scratch paper, and they did show the pieces of paper to the remote proctors in advance of the testing sessions beginning.
Okay, I did the baby bar and they didn't allow us to do that. So maybe it was different.
And just to clarify what was said, scratch paper, yes, was allowed for the performance test of the bar exam. That is correct, yes. But it's possible it wasn't allowed for the first year law student exam baby bar.
Thanks, Christina, for clarifying. Thank you, Crystal.
Thank you.
Okay, I am going to ask Savannah. Savannah has her hand raised. Savannah, you can unmute yourself.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So I was a graduate in 2020 and I took the first remote bar exam and the second remote bar exam that were given. I had disability accommodations, so I had some comments specific to the accommodations that really need to be revised. Number one is the requirement regarding the camera and the eye movement. So for a lot of people with physical disabilities where, you're having to sit for longer periods of time because of the fact that you're given additional time. So we have to sit longer than the traditional test taker. And while that's helpful for people with physical disabilities, not being able to move and stretch without the risk of being having your file triggered by the AI. If you, for instance, stretch and your eyes momentarily go out of the view of the camera. So as somebody who was actually Chapter 6 because of that exact reason, I know numerous people were Chapter 6 for that exact same reason, had to go through the whole appeal process and the additional stress that causes. It would be better, in my opinion, if there was a separate camera that was either required by the state bar facing in the opposite direction. So not only the camera that is coming from your computer, but a second camera behind you so that it can be seen that if you go out of the view of the camera that's directly facing you, it can be seen that you're not looking at any additional testing material, that you're not cheating. It preserves the security of the exam while also ensuring that people with physical disabilities that need to be able to move without to avoid significant pain or to avoid issues with their typing. Because that's personally, when I was trying to stretch, I have a neck issue from an accident that occurred immediately prior to the exam, and I still have that issue today. And without stretching, it would have been impossible to keep typing. And the state bar really needs to take that into consideration for a lot of people with physical disabilities, that if they do not have the opportunity to move, it not only impacts the ability to type fast enough to finish the exam, but impacts the concentration for the test taker. So I think that a camera facing the opposite direction, which I don't think that's impossible for exam software to be able to register more than one camera. It's definitely possible for any computer to hook up more than one camera. So it would be possible for ExamSoft to record more than one video feed. And then in addition to that, aside from additional time for the exam, additional breaks really should be added for people who do have either a physical disability due to, say, chronic pain or issues being able to type for long periods of time, or people who have issues, my apologies, or people who have issues with using the restroom and need to use the restroom more frequently. If you're in person, it is a lot easier to ask to use the restroom more than once. But when you're in a remote exam environment, there was a lot of conversations about people literally having to wear adult diapers, which is incredibly embarrassing and humiliating, and really is not something that the state bar should be expecting of people. So to allow for those additional breaks, I think would actually help solve that problem. Also, the issue that has been brought up about the internet connectivity, if, for instance, the internet was to go down, as long as that's registered and the specific test taker is given, say, additional time, if their internet goes down, I don't see the issue. But as of right now, I don't believe ExamSoft even has the capability to register that until after the exam has been reviewed.
Thank you, Savannah, for your comments and sharing your experiences. Your suggestion that there be a separate camera, maybe showing another view of the applicant as they're taking the exam, so that if they're stretching, that other places in the exam room can be captured, is is your thought that applicants would be responsible for obtaining additional cameras for that use?
Considering the camera that I'm talking about, you can get one for say $10 or $12 over at Fry's or Best Buy. I don't think that's too much to ask. And there's also, capabilities of asking for assistance from the law school. I know that there's some grants available for assistance if you had just graduated, but I think that's not an unreasonable ask.
Okay, thank you for that suggestion. And in terms of time for additional breaks and use of the restroom, my understanding is with some exam software, it requires a scan of the exam room and also potentially of the restroom. As an applicant, would you feel comfortable with those additional scans?
Well, here's the thing is that if you have to bring your whole camera over to the restroom and then have to reset it up, that actually takes time away from the break. And then it also could potentially mess up your setup for where your computer is. Because a lot of people that use, do the exam, they have their laptop set up to a larger monitor, and to disconnect all of that, bring that to the bathroom, and then essentially have to set it next to the bathroom. I don't think that's reasonable in my opinion. I think like a pre-exam view of the area, so say the restroom and the room that the test is being taken in is sufficient. It is literally impossible for that between when the exam starts and that break for somebody to say bring in material and put it into the restroom. There's not enough time, so I don't think that would jeopardize the security of the exam.
Should the state bar be concerned, in a situation like that, if the applicant, doesn't live alone and there could be others in the home that could, put, outlines or other information into the bathroom or into the hallway where you might pass to go to the restroom?
I think that the expectation, say for instance, that a applicant sign an agreement under penalty of perjury that they will not have any individuals placing those items into the restroom is sufficient. I mean, we're all individuals that are trying to become attorneys. If that cannot be expected of an applicant, then they really shouldn't be applying to become an attorney. But also the state bar should be trusting that if somebody signs a agreement like that under penalty of perjury, that they're not going to be violating it.
Okay, thank you. And then did you mention that you did not think ExamSoft could register that there was like a break in internet connectivity? Is that what you?
So it can register the break in internet connectivity, but it can't be registered until afterwards. So in my opinion, some of the exam software really does need to be revised. Say, for instance, if the internet goes down mid-exam, that it should register, okay, it went down for 5 minutes. 5 minutes needs to be added to the test taker's time.
Okay.
Instead of it being after the exam has already taken place, has been submitted, and you've lost that period of time.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for clarifying that.
Also, one last thing, since there's constant communication between the state bar and the ExamSoft, as far as revising the program, the program is it destroys the computer after you take the exam. My computer was trashed. Most of the people that I went to school with, their computer was trashed. It's a pretty big ask for the state bar, aside from the fact that they keep our iris scans, face scans, and the scans of our rooms in perpetuity. It's an expectation that we did not expect prior to 2020, and no other class was required to agree to that in order to take the bar exam and get their license. It's very unreasonable, and unfortunately, everyone since 2020 has been expected to do that.
Thank you, Savannah, for sharing that feedback.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I want to make sure if anyone has physically joined us at the San Francisco or the LA office that they have a chance. However, a chance to speak. However, I do not see any hands raised in the LA or San Francisco office. I also want to give anyone else that has not made a public comment yet or been able to interact with the staff that are on this meeting today a chance to talk. Again, it is *9 if you are on the phone to raise your hand, or if you are joining us via Zoom, it is the raise hand function near the bottom of your screen. Because I do not see any new commenters at this time, I am going to ask staff to promote Benjamin. Benjamin has his hand raised, and Benjamin, you should be able to take yourself off of mute.
I am. I also want to point out that at 2 o'clock to 2:30, Dr. Maduro, who I think you set pre-registered as Peter, will be available. So that's when he'll be joining if you want to check back to him. But I also want to address a few of the points that were in the last speaker's comments, particularly starting with this point of affidavit sufficiency and the expectation of recordings in the bathroom. I actually agree that the affidavits should be sufficient as a matter of policy, but I anticipate that some of you may be having concerns about that. So I also want to say that even if you don't make the policy that having a moral character determination, signing something under penalty of perjury, or the combination of those two things is enough to satisfy you, that I personally would have preferred being recorded in the bathroom to having been made to test in person in 2020. It's not that I would have been thrilled at having my bathroom use being recorded or anything. It's just that when comparing the relative embarrassment and harm of that to the harm of forced in-person testing, I think the applicant needs to be given the choice to pick the lesser evil to them, which for me definitely would have been being recorded in the bathroom. As far as how you accomplish that, if the test is not being taken in the bathroom and you are worried about someone else placing materials, I think you do need the multiple cameras or the body cam, which then takes you back to some of your other earlier concerns about what cameras, whether they would need internet, what software would capture that. And I do want to add on that ExamSoft, even aside from its inability to take something besides a webcam that doesn't provide the angles you need, is one of the glitchiest exam software programs that I've ever used in school or in the bar exam. I had a much better experience with the ILG program on the Iowa bar than with ExamSoft. I had a much better experience with Prometric, which is what, when people are talking about Pearson VUE contracts with Prometric, so they are talking about Prometric, to my understanding, when they say that. That both of those programs worked far better than ExamSoft, and you've had your own experiences with ExamSoft. But if the NCBE is requiring you to use ExamSoft, then maybe having supplemental software that can receive those videos. I don't think it needs to be live. I think it's fine to save video feed on the device as long as the applicant can't tamper with it. There's some security program that will tell you if the videos have been edited from when they were taken. As long as that's there, I don't think you need to receive them live. If the internet goes out and you receive them after the exam is over, as long as you can tell that they have not been edited, I think that that should be sufficient. But if you're not able to find that solution, I do want to echo back to what Savannah said about the affidavit under penalty of perjury and the moral character findings, specifically for those applicants who would have a particularly great harm from the in-person testing, like the immunocompromised applicants, risking their health for the very remote chance that they could cheat, would pass the exam that they otherwise would fail because they cheated and because they were given a license without having been able to pass the exam, that they would harm the public. That's not concrete enough of a harm to put an immunocompromised person, for example, into in-person testing, in my view. One of the things that I think made the internet outage possibility scarier in 2020, and I was the logon windows. So I think there was some allusions to that in Savannah's comment about what the internet going out and the impact of that. So if it happens during the test, yes, you might less time, but that's what you can still potentially complete the exam, and maybe there was a way to get that back. But the idea that you have to log on and start the test session in like a 10-minute window made it so that if there was a power outage or a short-term internet loss, and that happened the time within the 10-minute window, and then you weren't able to log on to a test session, then you also have this policy on your end that, to my understanding, where if you don't attend any test session, you can't be deemed to have taken the exam at all, even if your scores on the other essays are enough. And so basically, when you do that, especially for someone who has extended test schedules for their accommodations, you're saying if they have any internet outage during the 10-minute window of many test sessions on many different times, if that happens even once, the whole exam is tanked. That's a lot of risk for someone to put months of full-time work and tens of thousands of dollars potentially into preparing for a test on, if they think that that is one of the many horribles that can go wrong, that invalidates all that investment. And having that be for only some applicants is especially bad, because then those applicants are deterred from exam preparation to the same investment as other applicants, even if it doesn't happen, even if the technology works splendidly. A lot of those applicants with disabilities on a disproportionate basis have not felt comfortable investing in sufficient exam preparation to be competitive on that test. And that's going to put them at a disadvantage compared to other applicants. I think if you are encountering some technical problems with having multiple cameras or having software other than ExamSoft, I think it would also help us if you could, I know you don't want to give enough detail that would compromise exam security for something that you might be trying to do, but it might be easier to have commenters help you respond to that if you did give some high-level understanding of where you may be already struggling to see how you could do technologically something like the additional cameras, just so that if we have information that could help assuage some of those concerns, that information is provided. With respect to the Prometric test facilities, while I do really like the idea of the on-demand appointments in lots of locations that they offer more economically, I have taken a lot of standardized tests there, and those standardized tests do have some operational constraints. They require people who need special equipment, for example, to sign up months ahead of time for those test appointments, whereas they don't require that of standard applicants. And they sometimes had problems, I know, for bringing in the Herman Miller and body chair that FINRA approved me to be provided, it did take a couple rounds for in escalation to their operations vice president before they could accomplish that and actually have it at the test appointment I'd scheduled. So those things need to be watched out for applicants with those kinds of accommodations. I anticipate a common equipment you'll need is also the ViraWarn that I mentioned that scans the room for COVID, flu, and RSV. I think at that, even in a private room, you don't know who was in the room before you. There's still staff and proctors around. Indoors, the aerosols that COVID spreads through can travel through the whole space, not just if there's a long-term exposure. Rather, it's not just the distance isn't enough if you're not outdoors for a short period of time. Distance doesn't really matter anymore. So, that's an equipment that you might want to check if you're going to use Prometric that they can provide. That's made by Optiv.
Okay. Okay, Benjamin, I'm actually going to ask you to pause right there, just so that we can engage in a little bit of a discussion, because you've
Sure.
raised a lot of points and I don't want to lose them. And of course, if you have additional points you want to make later, I assume we will be able to accommodate that too.
Okay.
So I do want to note that, the State Bar is prioritizing, privacy of the applicants, but also wants to balance that with the security and validity of the exam. And so that's why the issue of bathroom breaks and even additional breaks is something we wanted to get feedback on from everybody here today about what could the State Bar do? Are there suggestions to ensure both privacy for the applicants and security of the exam? And it sounds like from both you and our prior commenter, like an affidavit feels sufficient. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes, for applicants in general, but especially yes for applicants who already have their positive moral character finding, and doubly especially yes for applicants who would have a greater than average disability harm from not being allowed the remote compared to standard applicants.
Okay, and then in terms of live video, internet connectivity, do you and the logon windows to be able to participate in each session? Do you have any suggestions for what the State Bar should do if an applicant does miss a window in order to continue on with the exam?
Yes, I think that to the extent that ExamSoft is able to keep a log of when you have internet connectivity, power, and those things, and when you don't, that log could be used to remove the login windows as a hard constraint to entering the test session, and then go back and see if there was good cause for the applicant to be late. I think that 10 minutes was not adequate, that there are reasons, disability reasons even, especially for people who have extra time, for why they couldn't go through all the security things in that amount of time, and that amount of time should be extended proportionate to extra time accommodations, and probably should have a higher baseline than 10 minutes to begin with. I think that the penalty for missing one should not be not being able to take the test. It should be something, even if there isn't good cause in terms of like equipment, there should still be maybe reduced, maybe it comes out of your exam time at a certain point, but not that you can't enter into the test session. Obviously, if it's there is a point, I understand, where there's an exam security risk of, if other people have seen the questions, then how do you know if they're allowed to enter so late that they don't know, that they haven't been tipped off what the question is and been allowed to prepare for it? But I think you already have some of that with applicants testing over more days than other applicants for their accommodations. And at a certain point, I think you just that is something where you already trust the affidavit and you should do so again. The July exam has a little bit higher equipment risks to it because of the wildfire season in California than the February exam. That was particularly bad for September, October 2020. Now that you're back on traditional schedule, it's maybe a little less of a problem, but I still think that when you have wildfire season potential, you need to be especially flexible because there's a lot of times where PG&E in this state just shuts off everyone's power in a certain area.
Do you have any suggestions if, I know with you bring up the PG&E power shut off, and that often happens with some amount of notice. Do you have any suggestions on how the state bar might manage a situation where we do have notice that perhaps power will be shut off in an area where we have applicants taking the exam?
I don't think you can rely on it. They don't always have a good track record of doing things the way they've given the notice for. So they're not set up to have a very inflexible event style simultaneous start exam be something they're accommodating, and they're not a very accommodating company. So I wouldn't trust the notices. And even if you trust the notices, if they affect an internet service provider, but not the applicant directly, that could be just as bad if you're relying on an internet connection, because then they would only give notice to the ISP that they were going to shut the power off. But then you have a situation where your internet goes out because somewhere along the links connecting you to the web, there's power gone and those switches are not working and those routers are not working at some office offsite. So I don't think you can rely on the notice. I think you have to assume that if you're going to be doing the exam that time of year, you need more flexibility.
And in terms of flexibility, are you speaking of, can you expand on that? Is it related?
Not having the 10-minute windows be a strict restraint to entering a test section.
Thank you.
Thank you, Benjamin, for your comments. I do see a commenter with their hands up. I am going to ask the facilitators to please promote Ray. And Ray, you should have the option of unmuting yourself.
Thank you very much. Basically a question with staff on the February 2024 exam that's coming up. I believe that you have worked to get office space within CalBar in Los Angeles and San Francisco. Is that correct? That you're going to use that for people who need testing accommodations as part of the options. So I guess okay, nobody's gonna nod. So if the if that's true, if the offices for CalBar are available for the February 2024 exam, these questions are really more for the July one. If that's available and it's within an area like Benjamin pointed out, sorry, I completely forgot about the rolling blackouts out there. But if that's available, this is a great beta test or an alpha test for using CalBar facilities. Because somebody had brought up the Army National Guard and stuff like that and facilities around and everything else that looked into. And I personally, dealing with the government, federal government like that, I tend to think that'd be more of a hassle than a benefit. But if you have your own offices under your control, then proctoring and availability. You know, seriously, in Florida, I mean, we're not nearly as many people testing for the bar exam, but years ago they moved it all to Tampa. So everybody taking the Florida bar is going to Tampa to take it in the convention center. It's a nice big convention center, but still it's kind of crowded. And but you know, that's that. So but if that's an option, it's available, and to see how it works for February 2024, if that's an available option. Because yeah, if you can have some kind of offices that are under your control and you have enough space and availability for folks that need the testing accommodations, that's a possible viable option. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ray. It is my understanding that the Los Angeles office for February 2024 is available for testing accommodations, but not our San Francisco office. I don't think is an option. But one of the issues we wanted to discuss today is being able to provide a remote testing option for applicants, regardless of whether they need an accommodation.
Correct. Yeah, no, that was my understanding on that. And also because I remember Donna mentioning, to be able to secure these things around, not only around California, but around the country and even worldwide. Because there are people I'm in Florida. So, I mean, there's a bunch of us that have to do a lot of traveling to get out there and everything else. But because Benjamin was saying something, it just kind of say, hang on a second, what about the offices or any offices, even if they're not like in any particular city, maybe where I'm not aware of where all your offices are, but I mean, if there are those kind of either CalBAR owned or I got to tell you, painfully, I was able to use local community colleges for doing weekend courses for professionals in emergency services for years. I would just basically just ask them, and they'd say, yeah, come on in. Yeah, we got a high school for you. We got everything you need. And they just give me this space because it's for first responders, emergency services, folks and things of that nature. That's where I came from, is my background on it. And that's where I created the program. And but yeah, public schools, agency owned operations, and you probably aren't going to have them, but I had access to military bases as well. So but yeah, so those kind of owned and controlled things, and for people for testing accommodations and see how it would work out. And I do appreciate that with the various accommodations that people need, that it's a difficult situation for y'all. And I'm sorry for everybody on that, but yeah, and it's difficult. So anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ray.
Okay, and just want to give a quick reminder, *9 for those of you dialed in that would like to make a public comment, and or the raise the hand function near the bottom of your screen if you're joining us via Zoom. I do not see any attendees in the San Francisco nor the LA office at this time. I do not see any of our attendees via Zoom with the hand raised. I do want to thank all of our commenters that have given comments so far today. I want to acknowledge that we will remain on this forum through the scheduled time of 3:30. That will allow any of our commenters that wish to join us now or later through 3:30 to an opportunity to make public comments if they wish. Staff will continue to monitor this forum for attendees that wish to place their hand up to make public comments. However, because I do not see anyone with the raised hand now, I am going to ask our facilitators to put up a PowerPoint slide alerting commenters and people that join us that we are still here. The forum is still live. And it gives instructions on how they can raise their hand should they join us. Again, we will continue to monitor this forum for raised hands. And we will be here until 3:30. Thank you again all so much for joining us, and we will remain open with this forum for the next hour plus. Feel free to raise your hand at any time. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I know we don't have any hands raised at the moment, but I thought I would throw out a couple topics if it spurs some ideas or suggestions from those who are still in the attendee pool. We've covered a lot of topics very extensively, and I want to thank the participants again for your feedback and thoughtful suggestions. And I also wanted to ask if there were additional suggestions around how the state bar might administer the bar exam remotely for those who might need handwriters or personal assistants or special software like the dictation software that Dragon and others. So if there are any thoughts related to those items specifically, we would welcome them at this time.
All right, thank you very much. I do see Benjamin with his hand raised. Benjamin, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Right. So I think the first two you mentioned, the handwriters and anyone who needs to be able to dictate to a, I'm not sure if you meant a person. I know you said the third one was a software. The for the handwriting one, you're just wanting to monitor, to my understanding, that the scratch paper was blank, or the paper that and that the papers that you were going to write the essay on in the essay books are not being misused. In those instances, having the camera not as a webcam, but from the same angle as you would be viewing the materials would, I think, achieve those purposes in terms of using special software instead of ExamSoft that couldn't run at the same time as ExamSoft. You would want to probably have some functionality either through separate software or the same software to record what is going on the applicant's computer screen, the way that what programs are open, what programs are not open, whether there is activity on ports, those kinds of things. And there may be software besides ExamSoft that doesn't lock out applicants the way that ExamSoft does, but that allows you to monitor those things. If that created a security hazard of some sorts, I guess you would also want the cameras for that reason too, to make sure that the screen, the monitor, was being recorded by and that the activity on the computer complied with the exam rules. I believe there's software that records exam screen, sorry, not exam, computer screens built into most operating systems already, like at least Windows and Macs have that functionality on the latest version. There should block that. Yeah.
Oh, I was going to ask Benjamin, do you know of any exam software that allows kind of the recording that you've described?
I don't think it would be exam software per se that record it's. You would be looking for a screen recording software in terms that like Zoom here has that functionality where you're recording the meetings. You can also share screens there. It can record screens. I think the Mac OS has similar functionality where you can make a video of what your computer screen was. You just have to enable it in the settings. It could be in certain versions of Mac OS. You may have to update to the latest version. I don't know exactly where it is in Windows because I don't use Windows, but I've seen other people make YouTube videos, for example, of their screens, so I know it can be done.
Thank you for those suggestions.
and I think Dr. Maduro should be joining, Peter should be joining pretty soon. I'm thinking he probably got held up in whatever was before this, but I hope that it's still open for him.
Yes, we do plan to stay open for the entire published time. So yeah, I anticipate he will be able to make his comments.
Okay. Actually, there was one other thing that I should mention, which is that knowing how these remote exams are going to be administered and what's going to be available in time to get the doctor recommendations without delay for making the testing accommodation requests in the first place is going to be important. So whatever exam you pick is when this is going to start. That should make, you should make sure that it's one where you've worked this out in time to give everyone notice of standard conditions a few months before you're going to have a deadline for that exam on making the requests themselves, to make sure that the appointments responsive to that can be obtained, the documentation can be obtained. Having the decisions as to whether an applicant will be able to take the exam in the way they've requested is also going to be important. A lot of times, if you're going to need applicants to set up equipment or to know whether or not to book arrangements, if they're going to be forced to travel, those kind of decisions need to be made well in advance of the exam, and they may affect whether the applicant is also willing, again, to make those investments into competitive exam preparation, where if they're not sure they can whether they can take the exam, they hold off on that, or they do less of it at risk. And then even if they get everything they want, it may still not be a level playing field if they weren't able to equally or competitively prepare for the exam. So it's going to be very important to get I know that this main subject of this forum is not the procedural rules revision, but there may be some overlap between the procedures and the way they provide information to the applicant about how this is going to be handled too, and how those work on getting these arrangements made. And for that reason, I would, when the board takes that up in a couple weeks, you might flag that for their attention, that the Committee of Bar Examiners recommendation is X, but that this could make some of the other public comments even more important, and they should be considered as whether the board wants to make amendments before it's moved to the California Supreme Court, and at the very least flag it for the court as well to consider in determining its questions on all the related things about alternative pathways that it's being asked to consider, and types of exams, also to consider the rules revision in that light and what may be needed to effectuate the requirements there. So I do want to encourage some of that synergy.
Thank you so much for those suggestions.
And friendly reminder for those on the line that would like to make a public comment, *9, or at the bottom of your screen is the raise hand icon. I will go ahead and ask the facilitators to unmute Ray for Ray's comments.
Thank you very much. Again, Benjamin Cohen reminded me of another thing with that. When I record these meetings, I'm not recording this one, but when I do record all those blue ribbon meetings and other important ones, I use a program that's free. It's called OBS software. It's open broadcaster software, and I can record instructional videos, gaming videos, and other things, but it records the actual desktop. And if I had another camera behind me, one other camera behind me, that would be at the reverse angle, but to record my desktop part, if I had a camera hooked up to my computer at the time, well, it would be a laptop for the bar exam, so it has a built-in one, that can be placed on the screen as well. So on the OBS software, I can put a picture of me on the screen and have everything I'm doing on my computer screen all being recorded into a single file. And that, I believe, just in a rudimentary kind of way could be validated, because some of the things that are going to come up for Calabar staff, and I'm sure you've already figured out, is going to be just unbelievably workload intensive, and that would be unfair, seriously, to all y'all. But the other thing with OBS software is if it's to be used with any other software like exam software or anything else, it has to be checked for the ability to be able to do so. ExamSoft is kind of flaky. One time it just lost all the formatting in October 2020, lost all my formatting, and I can't stand, I printed them out and I can't stand looking at them. And then for July 2021, where y'all refunded my money, that one there, I had to blue screen to death during the MBE, and I followed the procedure, and I was a happy camper because everything came back online. But I was one of the ones that got a refund. But if I had another camera like GoPro, and again, it's expense for the person that has to do it, but if I put another camera behind me pointing towards my computer screen, and of course for the MBE could not be done because NCBE would have a cow. But if y'all had your own, then I could do that. And if the video affidavit or whatever, under perjury, whatever, and all this, sends you the files. And these files these days can be pretty small, even if they're 8-hour days. The file size could be rather small. And there's ways to get those to you or whatever for validation of the exam. So that could be done. It's possible. There's a lot of free software. Some hardware is going to be included, but the recording of the desktop with that free software and putting our own face on this, it's pretty much what we got now, really, with ExamSoft. And the other reminder about ExamSoft is basically it's the very most basic word processing thing in the world on the computer, with the addition of it locks us out of our computer during the process. And I don't know who else has got that, but that's an option like that. Just have the reverse angle on it, because the first one, I don't know who I spoke with, but I talked to somebody and they said, don't do that. That's going to be a violation. And I said, I could put 2 cameras up on, because I'm a videographer. I got 30 years in videography for litigation support. So I could put cameras all the way around me to prove that there's no way in the world I cheated. And plus with the ExamSoft, whatever they got. So I could, and I just kind of wanted that to protect me from them. And because I have zero trust in them. But anyway, but that's other options. Reverse angle, using a free program, open OBS software could get the job done. It's a possibility, but it might take a little bit more time to figure out on y'all's end on that. Sorry about the y'all. Talk to you later. Thanks. Okay. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Ray. So I did have a follow-up question. You and others have mentioned, having a second camera with additional views of what the applicant might be looking at from behind and other angles. I think you mentioned, and another commenter mentioned that, that you could easily obtain a camera, maybe purchasing one or from a law school, but how would you suggest the State Bar handle a situation where an applicant, if this was a requirement for a remote test, an applicant couldn't afford a camera or didn't have access to additional cameras?
That's an incredibly excellent observation. Yeah, because it would add more. I mean, a GoPro is like $250 for, or up. And so that's an added expense unless somebody's going to be doing educational videos or something like that, like I do, then it's kind of a waste. But unfortunately I don't know how many, I didn't do the research, but I might do it now on how many testing facilities are around the country in all the various jurisdictions. I don't know if I can do Europe, but I can certainly do it in the United States. But I got to tell you, when I went to Pearson VUE for my FAA thing, there were cameras everywhere from every direction, and they weren't shy about it. You saw where all the cameras were, and they have their own computer, so I had to use their computer. So everything was logged, every keystroke was logged there too. So, but unfortunately, unless you have hardware and software under your control, under your own facilities, I'd have to unfortunately think that people in other jurisdictions, especially like myself, would have to go to a professional testing facility for that. That would be, to me, financially, exponentially cheaper. That would be the unfortunate best situation. It really depends on somebody's testing accommodation requirements, which you all are far superior on that than I would ever be. So thank you.
Thank you for your insight on that.
Okay, I see Peter would like to make a public comment. Peter, you should be able to unmute yourself at this point.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Dr. Peter Maduro, and I'm just going to make a few unilateral comments, and then unfortunately I have to run to an appointment, so hopefully they're not follow-ups, but 3 points. One, in respect of remote testing, if it's available, it ought to be extended, in my view, to all disabled applicants and not limited or denied based on seemingly practical problems associated with the disability accommodations that the applicant might need. Number two, just wanted to note that Mark Berman of the California legislature has opined that applicants ought to be entitled to individual test accommodations, even as I understand it, even if they require individualized versus standard security methods, and hope you guys will respect that. And finally, that as COVID-19 has represented and remains a high risk health hazard to many disabled applicants in particular, in my opinion, the disabled applicants' opportunity to apply and take the exam ought not be conditioned on their assumption of the full risk of that exposure. And in that connection, that there are apparently protections available to use in the administration of the exam that might mitigate this risk, like the Active Viral Warn and HEPA filtration system. So those are my remarks, and appreciate your attention to them.
Thank you, Peter. I know you have an appointment and need to go, but if you have a moment, I did want to ask if you had any suggestions for accommodating testing accommodations where the applicant might be out of view of camera. If there are any suggestions that you have that the State Bar might explore implementing to allow remote exam.
Well, you know, I can't say that I feel an expert on the actual, you know, methodology so much as in principle. I just don't want anyone to be excluded from the opportunity if at all possible. So I'd have to kind of defer back to you on the logistics of it. It's speaking more from in principle that I want, you know, maximal effort made to make a remote tested, you know, opportunity feasible for the disabled patient. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, yes, at the top of the hour, we did know, or top of the forum, we noted that there were some accommodations in other remote administrations of the bar exam that couldn't be accommodated remotely. And so if we were welcoming suggestions. So I just wanted to be sure you had the opportunity to provide them to us if you had any.
Yeah, I appreciate that opportunity, and I'd have to defer to those who share my, you know, in principle belief to make maximal effort, and defer to those who might have more specific insights into the practicalities.
Thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time to make comment today.
You're welcome. Thank you for the time. Bye-bye.
Again, I just wanted to thank everyone that is still with us at the Testing Accommodations Forum on ways to make a remote or hybrid exam secure. I am not seeing any hands raised at this time. *9 allows you to raise your hand on the phone or raise your hand function at the bottom of the screen. I am going to ask the facilitators to please put up, oh, Yes. Can I promote Donna?
Sorry, this was unplanned, but sort of in line with what Elizabeth was doing sort of at the start of this, I'd like to pose a question and get some thoughts from folks if you have any. Going to the issue of in-home proctors. One of the topics that one of the suggestions that was raised earlier was that due to, especially for immunocompromised applicants, that the proctor wouldn't be in the same room as the individual, and there would be CCTV or some other way that the in-home proctor could be viewing the testing area for security. But I'm curious about your thoughts of the in-home proctor having to use the same bathroom that the applicant may have to use, eating their lunch in the applicant's home, and also sort of what if the proctor doesn't show up? How would we address that? Really sort of trying to think through some of these more intricate issues with the in-home proctors, and hear your thoughts on how we might respond to some of those questions. And also, before I stop talking, because I see we have a hand, using the in-home proctor also to with their own eyes scan the bathroom, scan the testing area for material that's not supposed to be there, the same way that is done by proctors at an in-person testing facility.
Thank you, Donna. If the facilitators will go ahead and promote Benjamin. Benjamin, you should be able to take yourself off mute.
I am, and thank you for the question. So as far as using the bathroom and eating lunch and all of those things, it would be a reason to engage in some of the testing and equipment that I think was mentioned. Certainly, it's not necessary to have an internet connection to view the camera footage from outside the home, because Bluetooth or similar methods have range enough for that. But if logistically the implementation did require the proctor to have these kinds of in-person interactions with the applicant or in the space, there would need to be some of these COVID mitigations, like having them test and then have guards against a false negative or premature testing by also having the masking, the viral worn, and those other mitigations in place. Using the bathroom is of no greater risk than having them in the indoor portion of the applicant's home at all. In my view, the way COVID at least spreads is through aerosol secretions, not mostly by touching surfaces. And so there's nothing really especially hazardous about them in the bathroom so much compared to just being in the indoors at all. Now, eating lunch is a little bit different, because if they eat lunch inside the applicant's home, they have to take their mask off, and that will increase the volume by several hundred X of aerosols that they secrete if they were to be infected. And that goes to the rate at which transmission could occur. I would strongly caution that it would be a better practice, if available, to have eating take place outside, even if they were going to be in the house otherwise, for that reason. But regardless, the bar exam is very, very long. It's all day. If someone is going to be having an indoor interaction over that time, that length of time, the concentrations of aerosols go up it with the amount of time that the source is present in the space. And then, of course, the longer you're exposed to it, the less of a concentration you need to get an infectious dose. So with that length of exposure and both parties sort of being indoors, I think you do need all these other methods of sort of a Swiss cheese approach where they're layered. And if one fails, good, then you have another layer blocking transmission. That's why you don't just do only the masking, only the testing, only the filtration. You do all of the above, and you make sure that it's layered that way. I think it's fine to have someone with all those things there in the applicant's home if necessary, but I want to emphasize that a lot of the transmission risk of traveling is going to be a lot higher than even if there's proctoring on eyes of the area. There's going to be a lot more exposure from traveling than from having someone come to your home.
And if I can ask you a follow-up, Benjamin. So typically, the proctors who proctor in-person exams are entitled to, they get covered by other proctors if they have to go to the restroom. They're entitled to a certain amount number of breaks during the day, just as part of our employment agreement with them. And so if we were to employ that strategy in home, that would mean essentially having 2 proctors in your home. I'm imagining what a response would be, but I want to not imagine it and ask you sort of what does that do sort of to the notion of having an in-home proctor if what you'd really be having potentially is 2 people either at the same time or filling in for one another?
I think the more you have the incrementally higher risk you're taking, and so there is some benefit to trying to arrange these agreements in a way that you don't need more than 2 individuals. That may not be logistically possible, but it's worth trying to do as just one thing. But I think if you use a Lucira method test of all of them and not just the person on each test day, not just the person who is doing the primary responsibility, you have something that scans the room and not just the individual, like the ViraWarn. And then if there's somehow false negatives on both of those things, there's still HEPA filtration to manage how incrementally high the concentrations get in the room. All those things layered, you can still have, I think, 2 people be reasonable, even 3 people probably being a lot better than traveling to a test site. So that, but I think I wanted to answer one of your questions about what happens if the proctor doesn't show up. And I wanted to specifically point out that that happens at the test centers too, where there are performance issues where maybe the proctors are not doing what they've promised contractually the state bar they're going to do, whether that's by not showing up, whether that's by not following the exam rules, not allowing accommodations because they remember some part of their training about some rule and they don't think on their feet that there might be an exception to that made that the state bar is okay with. There's a lot of incident reports that I have looked through and some of the public records that have been provided to me. I've requested a lot of records of those kinds of incidents. And I think it's a big problem you need to be working on, is to addressing the fact that this is a very high stakes exam. It's a very strict compliance kind of exam. You need people who are going to be have an intimate understanding of what they are or aren't supposed to be doing, what the applicants are or aren't supposed to be doing, who are aware of ahead of time of all the different areas that are part of the boilerplate that have changed when an accommodation is granted to an applicant they will be supervising. All of and maybe greater amounts of training than the kind of temporary contract work that I have observed is being done in the test centers too. And I think that that is really important if you're going to make the exam even more complicated with these additional modalities, but it's really important wherever you administer the exam that you revisit the kind of boilerplate instructions, that you revisit whether those are customized when changes are made, that you look into training, longer, more thorough training of the proctors, paying the proctors maybe a little bit more to get the kind of people who are going to perform with the kind of consistency that you need with the kind of stakes you have and the very rigid timeframes that you need the performance to take place in reliably, and that the applicant has. If they're in their test session and they have to explain to the proctor that the proctor got something wrong, even if they convince the proctor that they have the accommodation or that there was some misunderstanding about the rules, if that's taken time and attention away from their exam, there's prejudice there with the kind of time pressure they're under in answering the test question. So I think there does need to be a lot of reforms there.
Yeah, thank you for those observations. Certainly, we have observed some of those ourselves, and including sort of as you started, that we do have proctors sometimes who don't show. The reason I asked the question was if they don't show in an in-person setting, we have enough other people that we can shuffle around and make sure that every test taker is proctored. That's harder if we're just sending a single proctor to a home, sort of how we adjust for that when we don't have 100 other proctors around in the area. But thank you so much for those insights about the proctors and the need to improve the quality.
I can propose actually a suggestion for that too. So I think the idea could be that if you have applicants living within a certain geographical radius, say 50 miles of each other, or of a centralized hub like one of your offices, that you could flag those geographic similarities and have a set of backup proctors who are on, or even staff who are on call for that region, that, you know, like the Bay Area, Sacramento, wherever you're having a large number of applicants who have this arrangement, have a backup list covering that region, who are within a reasonable drive of wherever someone didn't show up, and then deploy them as needed.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Okay, I will once again ask the facilitators if you would promote Ray. Ray, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Because of my first year law students exam, 6 attempts. Anyways, I was at Pasadena. I always went to Pasadena because once you start going somewhere, you get this situation going, you just go, you don't even have to think about it, just worry about taking the exam and take your mind off everything else. And but Pasadena always seemed to have, for the number of people who were there and the people who needed testing accommodations, I was able to observe that there appeared to be certainly enough testing accommodations facilities available, either because of the Sheridan taking, I believe one time for the bar exam, you took the whole floor. And then, but for testing accommodations in the testing center for the first year exam, I remember people going through the eastern door of the conference center and, you know, being able to, and they had all kinds of, I mean, I thought I saw people in hospital beds getting wheeled in there. So, I mean, accommodations were being well taken care of. And I'm sure I wouldn't have seen any of that stuff for the second floor or whatever floor it was of the Sheridan, but I do remember a whole floor being, secured off on that. And all of this discussion, number one, really makes me feel for all y'all at that's New York for you guys. For you folks out there trying to put this together to make it fair and equitable for everybody involved. And but yet at the same time, I'm thinking that portfolio bar exam's looking pretty darn tasty, even though I'm slightly critical of some of the procedures on it. That's giving people along the lines of the PLL program, which is actually active and in place now as a solid alpha or beta test there, of seeing how it can get people successfully up to speed to get that job done. And I've known a lot of people who are in that program who have either since passed the bar exam or still in the program for whatever reason they had to remain in it. But these seem to alleviate, they erase locations, they erase proctors and the issues that come along with those. And they erase a number of other expenses like staff movements, as many staff movements and supplies and procedural things that are required during a testing scenario. And along those same lines, the thing I'm suggesting, I know that it's because people haven't really seen this before, which is why I changed the name of the suggestion to onboarding, because I've witnessed for the last 30 years the profession of law locally in Florida, South Florida, Central Florida, where the attorney clients of mine have been begging for the law schools to evolve from this 100-year-old process from Langdell, from Harvard, to say, hey, we need these people to have the actual skills and abilities when we hire them. So I'm talking to people who are the managing attorneys of these firms down here. And I'm sure it's the same everywhere. I do remember people from San Francisco. I had an interstate case where people came and there were same complaints. And that was 20 years ago. So, but that was the thing with my onboarding thing, because right now we circulate the subjects being tested. But if we can not circulate and offer 100% of what is, better than minimally qualifying to get people up to speed and hitting the ground running, I think, and if y'all take the careful consideration and really think about that, and this is why it requires 100% perfection to pass, because this is what you have to know. It's the vital information that you really have to know. There's no cheating, because if they're cheating and they get disbarred, they'll never practice law in the known universe ever again, because that should be the minimum restriction. If you've done the process, you've done it, you elected to do it, you want to do it, you did it, you onboarded, welcome to the profession of law. Took you 8 to 12 weeks to get there. You've already had the law study stuff, but now you must subscribe to this thing. If you get disbarred, you're done forever, anywhere. And it seems to be like people are in support of that in other jurisdictions, but that idea, it's like, no, one and done. We can't have the public being abused this way. But also, just to throw this out there, we, the multiple test takers, I swear I'm not trying to fail a thing, but it's multiple, we are the general public. I may not be a Californian, but I'm a Floridian, which is worse. But the bar here is worse. But the fact of the matter is, we are, and we need this protection from this too. We need the transparency and all that stuff. And I think that's a way to solve many of these problems. Thank you very much. Sorry for taking so much time.
Thank you, Ray, for your comments.
Hey, thank you, everyone. I think at this time, I am going to ask the facilitators to put up the PowerPoint slide, letting people know that we are still here until 3:30 this afternoon. We welcome your comments, welcome your feedback, and thank you so much for participating. Hope to hear from you soon.
And it looks like we actually have a hand raised again. Benjamin, if we could ask our facilitators to please give him the mic. And it looks like you should be able to unmute yourself.
I am, thank you. I did just think of something that I thought would be helpful to get some clarity on, which is that the MBE side of this is currently an obstacle in the remote testing from the statements that have been made about what is an option, what's not an option. And I think I have heard from a lot of people, as well as myself, that there's a lot of confusion about what the NCBE's position is and what the state bar's position is, because there's been some pointed fingers in both directions. And to my understanding, the NCBE is claiming that they are not banning remote MBE testing as an accommodation. And then there have been statements from the state bar that it's impossible to grant an accommodation for remote testing if it's not otherwise offered because the NCBE isn't allowing it. And so I think one area to maybe get some resolution towards that option is to see if there's a communications breakdown of some sorts with the NCBE saying, oh, we're only banning it as a standard condition, and those FAQs.
Thank you, Benjamin. I don't have that information about the MCB and their position on that. So, but we will, take your comments as we move forward with planning.
All right, I think if you're going to do that research, I think I want to point out that the whether or not the exam is decided upon remote or not remote is a standard condition. I think it affects that bright line that I said at the beginning of my first comment, where if it's going to be remote as a standard condition, it needs to be remote as an option for everybody who wants it to be remote, as a bright line where there's not going to be rare cases of exclusions. But if it's not a standard condition, I still think there's a lot of importance to figuring out a lot of these questions about exam security that you're asking yourselves now for purposes of what accommodations are available, because remote testing ameliorates a lot of disability needs. There's the physical access to the test site that it ameliorates, the lack of travel, the ability to have ergonomic equipment that the state bar doesn't need to pay for. That was something that, as you know, came up in my individual situation where there was a dispute that never got resolved as to whose burden it was to provide the ergonomic equipment, where it's not really portable, it's expensive and burdensome to transport, it's expensive to purchase an extra set, who handles that? And remote testing really moots that issue, because the applicant can use what works for them to meet their disability needs at home. And so there's a lot of reasons why it's the accommodation that would best ensure the level playing field, and the COVID risk is another. It's just, there's all these things to work out. And so even if you make it so that the MBE standard is in person, even if you make it so that the whole exam is is in person, I think there needs to be the availability, the design of these systems to have that be available as a testing accommodations. And if the NCBE is going to allow it as an accommodation for sorry, I have to silence that my phone. If they're going to allow it as a standard condition, then not as a standard condition, as an accommodation, it should be made available as an accommodation to petition for the whole test, or regardless of what you do in terms of standard conditions for essays or MBE. And if it's not going to be something the NCBE ever allows to be administered, accommodation or not, I think there's a situation where they're exposing you to an ADA violation. You're not going to respond probably to that position here, but I just need to put that out there, that it's through the 28 CFR 35.130B says through contractual or licensing agreements. It's not just about what's your policy when you choose the NCBE as a vendor and they're doing unlawful policies. So to the extent that there's that issue there, it really goes to the merits of using them as a vendor versus designing your own multiple choice questions. And if you feel bound by the legislature saying you need to give law schools 2 years notice, I don't read that statute the same way. I read it as if you're going to have similar types of questions, that's still to what's currently on the MBE, that you're still not needing to give that kind of notice if there's the same topics, for example. But in the scaling, bandage has to be ripped off at one time or another because the MBE is on the way out. You're going to have to do what data sets you can get, and the fastest way to build those data sets up for the scaling with your own questions is to start them sooner. So I think that really, whether you continue using them as a vendor, this really goes to that too, what their position is as you research it on the accommodations.
Thank you, Benjamin. As I mentioned earlier, our focus today is on how to administer, day one of the bar exam with the essays and the performance tests securely in a remote fashion for all applicants primarily. And so any kind of discussion about the bar exam or pathways to licensure, I think are taking place in other forums, but we do appreciate your reiterating your thoughts on that.
Thank you. And I just forgot one subpart. If you do read that statute about notice to the law schools differently than I do, I think the legislature, if this was all explained that this was causing this big budgetary holdup or this accessibility holdup, from my conversations with the legislature, they might be more willing to work with you on resolving those kinds of things than you think. There's maybe some currently strained relationships, but I think if you gave them that information, that you shouldn't discount the ability to get assistance from them in amending those requirements that you read might be in your way, especially if you're willing to adopt what they're proposing on the procedural components that are also not in this forum, but that the legislature has weighed in on.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you. And I do see another hand raised. If I could ask our facilitators to recognize Taylor. And Taylor, you should be able to unmute.
Hi, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well and is ready for a good weekend. One thing that just came to mind as we were talking and remembering all of 2020 and what that looked like. For those of you who don't know, I am the director of bar preparation and academic success at Thomas Jefferson in San Diego. So helping a lot of students as they dealt with the remote exam and everything that went their way. One accommodation that hasn't been discussed was students that did not have a sufficient test space. And I know that students applied for accommodations to try to go into a testing space if wherever they were living was an insufficient space. And given certain requirements within the county, within the city, we were only able to do so much as a school. We're not a large campus. We only have so much space available. And one thing that was an issue is when students did come to campus, we still had to have a 1 person per room set up. And, we didn't have offices that we could clear out of all the stuff. So we ended up with a very large lecture hall having 1 student, and it really restricted how many students we were able to help out. Given the fact that no one is saying COVID is over and is not a concern, but if a student is needing certain accommodations that are not related to being immunocompromised or whatever might else exist that would require them to also still need that private space, if there was a way to work with schools to be able to provide certain spaces for either handwriters or just students who don't have a sufficient home testing space or need to use certain equipment and they've been using that equipment on their campuses throughout their law school career. I know that there is always concern about conflict of interest and wanting to make sure that it is always on the up and up. You know, I speak for myself, I speak for my colleagues, very confidently saying, we would never do anything to put our ethics, our standards at risk just for the sake of benefiting our students. We care about them deeply and will work hard for them, but we would never put anything at risk. And I know many administrators at many other law schools who feel the same way. So whether it's certain codes have to be signed or it's a single proctor that comes in to verify that we are following certain procedures and standards, you know, we have students who are applicants who are not California law grads. It's not going to solve the problem for everyone, but it might alleviate some of the issues for some of the test takers if there is a way that law schools are able to partner and provide space in certain situations with certain accommodations that may look a little different than what it did previously, given the fact that the world has changed across the 3 years since we first played this game.
Thank you, Taylor, for those comments. Are you suggesting that the state bar engage with law schools to provide space for their students only, or would it be open to other applicants who may not, we've heard from other commenters who are like, for example, out of state, would that
Absolutely.
be an option?
Absolutely. And I understand it's not a perfect solution. And I think, unfortunately, it would be a school by school issue because, I've been on campuses that have multiple buildings and multiple, classrooms and, entire floors of offices that are currently not occupied because people have worked remotely and they're not coming into the office anymore and this and the other. Our campus is not built like that, where we would not be able to really take in a large influx, especially if it were situations where they still had to be one person per room or, this or the other. I think there are a lot of other considerations, but I think it is a conversation maybe having at the Cal Bars meeting and having at, the ABA meeting where you have deans and administrators and seeing what they're able to take on. And if it's something where it could be either part of the solution or, for all applicants or even just a percentage of applicants, I do think it is worth exploring and having the conversation at the very least.
Right. Thank you so much for that suggestion.
So just to confirm, there's currently no other hands raised via Zoom, and I don't see anyone with either of our facilitators in Los Angeles or San Francisco. And just as a reminder, if you are on the phone, you can raise your hand by pressing *9, and on Zoom, you have the option to raise hand. And it looks like we have a commenter, Charlene. If I could ask the moderators to please recognize her. And Charlene, you should be able to unmute now.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, so regarding the testing accommodations and having it be broken up, is that, I'm sorry, I'm catching up here. I definitely do not want the accommodations to be separated because you're gonna be penalizing people that have received accommodations. And I'd like to be able to submit written comments still. I know you're gonna be making a decision, but I think it's really important that people with testing accommodations are not penalized and punished. You're going to give non-test takers that do not have their accommodations to take the test. You're going to give them more time and more breaks. I'll give you an example. When I tested previously, my body was in so much pain. I was taking 2 separate muscle relaxers each day throughout the entire day on top of Tylenol and Advil. So if you're going to give people that don't have any physical limitations, you're going to give them breaks where they can rest and their body can recover and they could focus on the exam instead of the amount of pain that they're in. I know that there's hundreds, if not thousands, of other people in the same or similar situations as myself. I apologize. I thought the meeting was tomorrow, so I'm not prepared to make comments as articulately as I can. And that's another thing. I really wish you guys would create a website or web page just dedicated to everything related to testing accommodations. It is very, very confusing for myself to be able to navigate the website to find when the meetings are related to testing accommodations. Oftentimes the day of the test or the day before, the link on the front page is missing. So for people that have been coming to these meetings for the last 4 years, if it's challenging for me to find you, it's challenging for people that have not participated in this process. So I really hope you'll take that into account and in consideration, reach out to law school students that are in law school right now, find out their input because it's going to impact them. Even talk to undergraduates and find out what they think. This has been a really long and arduous process for myself, and I can't even imagine what it's like for somebody just entering this process now. Please have some compassion and try to see it through our perspective. And by doing that, talk to us one-on-one, talk to us in groups, and not necessarily at this level, because once it's at this level, most of your decisions have already been made. I'm a former elected official. I know once we get recommendations from our admin, our decisions have already been made by that point. That's all I have to say. I apologize that I was not prepared.
No need to apologize, Charlene. I do want to note for you that the purpose of our forum today is to have a dialogue with folks about how to make remote testing accommodations secure. And we wanted to, take feedback and suggestions from commenters. So if you have suggestions on how the State Bar could ensure a remote exam while providing testing accommodations, we would welcome them at this time.
Sure, thank you. I'm sorry, I got the meetings mixed up. I apologize.
No worries, no worries. And I also want to know if you wanted to make written comment after today.
Yes, I would.
You can do that. There is an email address. I believe it's admissionsdirector@calbar.ca.gov.
Great, thank you. I appreciate that. I will do that over the weekend. Thank you.
Thank you. With our remaining time that we have left, there was another item, if anybody who's still on the line has any thoughts on, related to how this, if there are suggestions for the State Bar to ensure a secure exam when an applicant requires a hard copy of exam materials and they are taking the exam remotely. If there are any thoughts on that.
And Benjamin has raised his hand. If you could please give him the mic, and you should be able to unmute yourself.
Hey, so I thought that one was sort of solved in the Gordon case, where there were some exchanges of declarations at the time regarding a product. I guess it was some sort of briefcase that could only be opened when with a certain combination that could be shipped to the applicants, and then when they were given the time to open it, they were given the combination to get access to the materials or something like that. And I think the problem with implementing that for October 2020, as I understand the declarations that were submitted by the State Bar, was that it was out of stock and they wouldn't be back in stock by October 2020. Now you have more lead time, you don't have to administer the exam quite in such a hurry after identifying these things. I would hope that some of those things could be revisited, and maybe you could deliver materials that way. Letting applicants print materials is going to be harder to secure, as you probably have been thinking already, because it's a lot harder to the printer is usually not right in front of the applicant. If they have their desk set up in a way to take the exam, it's going to be harder to get all the angles you need to verify what they're looking at. If they're going to wait until the test session starts to retrieve paper from a device that's not right in front of them, maybe it can be done with enough cameras. That's another point to make, is that I think there was discussion about GoPros costing $250, but those are cameras for professional photographers who are trying to make videos for their job or for some hobby. There are $20 cameras, $30 cameras that you can buy off Amazon that will be detailed enough in image quality to verify what the applicant has access to during an exam for this purpose. So I don't want to make it like the financial thing is like a budget buzz breaker for either the applicant or the State Bar, when it doesn't need to be.
Thank you, Benjamin.
Friendly reminder for those in the audience, *9 to raise your hand. We still have 10 minutes left and we welcome your comments.
So we just have a couple minutes left in our forum. We wanted to be sure to give another call out for any more comments. Confirming that I don't see any via Zoom or in person in our San Francisco or Los Angeles offices. We'd like to take this opportunity to thank everybody so much for joining us today, especially those of you who've been with us for the full 3 hours. We really appreciate your feedback as we're exploring these modalities for the exams going forward. And let me pause to see if my colleagues have any other comments before we close out.
I would just add a thank you to everyone that commented today. And if there is additional feedback, you may email admissionsdirector@calbar.ca.gov.
Thank you for everyone being here.
And nobody is saying it, but with that, we are going to close today's session.